even if you point 4 of these fingers to so-called outsiders, are you willing to point even 1 to ourselves?
Yourself.
Exactly. Just 1. That's all I ask. 1 out of 5. Make it the pinky. Make it the shortest one, okay? But understand that when we do this, when we engage in self-criticism, we are actually living up to one of the most beautiful verses in the Quran, which states, God does not change the condition of a people until they change what is inside themselves.
Yeah.
Chapter 13, verse 11. And frankly, I like to think of it as a 1311 kind of solution to a 911 kind of abomination. So again, I very much come from a place of faith when I talk about the need for introspection. But I'm going to say one other thing about this, which I alluded to just a few moments ago, but it cannot be said enough. I remind again my fellow Muslims that if we're going to have integrity opposing imperialism, then we also must stand up to the imperialism within our own faith communities. Okay. Arab news sources, forget English language news sources or Swedish language news sources, Arab language news sources have been studied over the last decade, and it has been shown conclusively by Arab researchers, for what that counts, that more Muslims are being tortured and murdered at the hands of fellow Muslims than any foreign imperial power. Yeah. And it gets to the point, actually, of what respect has come to mean as well, right? I go to university campuses all over the world, and it's such a pattern that the emotional walls go up with these kids, and, I teach students, so I'll respectfully refer to them as kids. The emotional walls go up, the hand goes up, respect me. And I say to them, well, it's precisely because I respect you that I'm asking you these questions right now. Because if I didn't respect you, I would have no faith in your capacity to think critically. I'm actually, at this moment, treating you as my equal, treating you as a peer, okay, rather than as a child. And so, again, we've got to remember that these issues really do need a calling out of the emotion. So, for example, I say, right now, I know what you're feeling, okay? Because I have my identity assaulted all the time. But again, understand that there is no equation that the angrier you are, the more right you are. Okay? Doesn't work that way. And again, getting back to tactics and strategies, when you call out, when you identify those emotional the emotional turmoil that's going on in people when they call you all kinds of names and hurl labels at you, I just mean, don't freeze like a deer in headlights. When these labels are hurled at you, there are ways of responding that are kind, that are polite, that are dignified, and that are very resolute.
When it comes to migrated communities in West, I assume that for a lot of people who would, in their own countries, turn criticism towards themselves,
right.
Their own group.
Right.
When they come here,
yeah.
They kind of feel the need to protect what's theirs.
Right. Identity is made up of labels that other people hand to you and often tell you need to accept if you are going to be pure of faith. But it's not your identity that they're giving you; it's theirs.
That they impose.
That they tell you must accept if you're going to be pure. Okay. Well, again, what they really mean by that, and it's you have to read between the lines, is you must accept that if I'm going to accept you as being authentic.
So you are Gujarati and you're Muslim, and this is what
and
you
must,
are.
Well, exactly. You must have these values. You must think, or as the case may be, not think a certain way. And that is all that you can be. But if I accept that, again, please appreciate, I speak as a believer in the Creator. I'm bowing down to human beings as opposed to a deity, a creator that is so worthy of worship that he, she, or it will have used that creativity to create something unique in me.
You mean you're bowing down to culture?
I'm bowing down to those who have the authority, or they think they have the authority, and I give them that authority if I'm bowing down to them, to define what constitutes official culture.
Okay.
What constitutes the culture that is to be, quote, respected, i.e. not challenged. Okay? Culture, and this brings up a really important point. Again, in multicultural societies like Sweden, like Canada, like the United States, culture increasingly is being treated like an individual, i.e. we must give culture or cultures their rights. What? What is culture? Culture is how things are done. That's it. Or, more sort of specifically, how people do things. Now notice how people do things. Okay? Culture doesn't do anything in and of itself. Culture is not a sentient being with free will and a conscience. Okay? People speak and do on behalf of culture. So if we give cultures certain rights, like human beings ought to have, then in fact what we are doing is further empowering those leaders of any cultural community who already have the power to define what is to be respected as official culture. That's not progressive. That's not liberal. That's the exact opposite. If you're going to be, again, forward-thinking, it seems to me that what you would want to try and do is lessen the disparity of power within cultural communities rather than feed that disparity of power. So one of the things, again, a tip, and I learned this, by the way, from a Scandinavian anthropologist, is that the next time you are told you must respect a custom, ask yourself, what does my respect for that custom do to the most vulnerable in that community? If it makes them more isolated, such as women and children, if it makes them more isolated, more insulated, and therefore further endangered, you don't owe that custom any respect. Quite the opposite, in fact. Is how, as a brown-skinned Muslim, call me whatever else you want, Canadian, I have no problem criticizing certain aspects of Canadian culture. And nobody, Nima, nobody says to me, you're not allowed because you weren't born in this country. No, my fellow Canadians totally accept me as a Canadian. Once again, back to the double standards for a second. I find it, again, fascinating that, Muslims in Europe, in Muslim-majority countries, have no problem excoriating U.S. foreign policy. If somebody said, if you're excoriating U.S. foreign policy, and please go ahead, because there are certain elements of it that deserve that kind of, that kind of disrespect, so go right ahead. But imagine if somebody said to me, as a Canadian and a Muslim, you can't go there. You can't criticize U.S. foreign policy. You don't know the culture of America. You don't know what those soldiers have gone through. And by the way, you also don't know military culture. So you don't understand. You can't put yourself in their shoes. Can you imagine anybody saying, oh my God, you're so right.
I'm so sorry.
I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to offend. Nobody would say that.
Respect the military culture.
And why would nobody say that? Because it's stupid. Okay? Nobody would say that because nobody should say that. It's just absurd. Similarly, it is absurd to say to a non-Muslim or to an agnostic, who comes from Muslim heritage, you can't say that about my religion or about my culture. Please do, because you're treating me as an equal when you do that.